Aligning practice, education, and regulatory nurse leaders is our episode topic. Rejoining us for this episode is Dr. Jerry Mansfield, a PhD prepared nurse and Vice President and System Chief Nursing Executive at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas. This episode was recorded in mid-January, a few short weeks before Jerry began his leadership at UTMB on February 1st. Prior to UTMB, Jerry has held 3 different chief nurse titles within the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center and also held chief nurse roles at the Medical University of South Carolina, as well as the Mount Carmel Health System based in Central Ohio. Jerry was a Robert Wood Johnson Executive Nurse Fellow. So let's get started.
Welcome to the BRG Nurse Executive Podcast. BRG is a global consulting firm that helps organizations in disputes and investigations, corporate finance, and performance improvement and advisory. BRG's healthcare performance improvement practice offers multidisciplinary services to healthcare organizations. We focus on implementation with innovative, independent, and data-driven solutions. In the BRG Nurse Executive Podcast, we discuss improving patient care by advancing nursing leadership. For more information about BRG, please visit thinkbrg.com. Now here's your host, Nick Chmielewski.
Jerry, welcome back. Thank you so much. Appreciate you spending the time today to talk about aligning practice, education, and regulatory nurse leadership.
Happy to be here.
Nearly 20 years ago, you participated in the 3-year Robert Wood Johnson Executive Nurse Fellowship. Can you talk a little bit about that program and its opportunities?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's no longer in existence, but there is a bridge. I was actually encouraged to apply for this program by our medical director at University Hospital East. And he said, I really think you ought to give this a try. But I ignored him for a year and I didn't do it. And so he came to me and he said, hey, did you ever? And I said, no, I didn't apply. And he said, okay, you're going to apply and I'm going to write your letter of reference, but you're not going to see it. But just go through the steps. I think you ought to give it a whirl. And out of respect for him, truly, because he was a great friend and colleague, I said, absolutely. When I got into the fellowship, it was probably the most unbelievable experience I ever had in terms of leadership development in my life. And at the time, I was pursuing my doctorate in public health at Ohio State. I was also the first chief nurse at University Hospital East, so I thought I had plenty to do. But this 3-year fellowship was extraordinary. And what I learned, Nick, through that, first of all, was a tremendous amount of tool-driven assessment. I have a stack of paper this thick. We filled out more forms and had more interviews and more experiences with digging into who we were and what we were doing in terms of our not only personal life, professional life. It was very intense. I also learned that in this 3-year program, it was molding, M-O-L-D-I-N-G, of how you should be as a leader. And we could talk for hours on that. But the most important thing I got was there were 3 types of nurse leaders that were in the program simultaneously. So they would bring in 20 new nurses from the nation once a year, and you were in a 3-year fellowship cycle, and you were interacting with people that were in chief nursing roles in health systems. You were with folks that were deans and in universities and colleges of nursing, and also folks that were very highly positioned within public health organizations. You have nurses in those 3 sort of spheres. And what we're learning is that we have simultaneous issues that are important to the profession overall and providing healthcare to improve the outcomes of health for citizens in the U.S. That was your job. And then part of it is also, what's your next step? Wherever you are and whatever you're doing with this knowledge and information and experience, then what's your next level? And I will never forget 1.5 years into the program, you had a sort of a pulse check with members of the National Advisory Committee, folks from the national office, and they would review, what have you done? What have you learned? And then it was, we've got some feedback for you. And there was a recruitment firm that was part of that conversation. And I had a piece of paper and they said, what's your next role? And I said, I'm going to be a chief nurse exec. I want to be in a health system. I want to be a CNE because I was a CNO at the time. And they asked me, what do I think are the things that are important for a CNE to do? I listed those. And then they said, okay, take your list and honestly say, what have you done? What do you have yet to do? And it was very hard because in my head, I thought I was ready. But on paper, I certainly, but I used that as my blueprint. I'm like, okay, if this is where you are and that's what you want to be, here are the 8 to 10 things you've got to move forward. You can't just say, I'm done. You've got to pull it forward. And that piece of paper I have saved, and I think has been one of the biggest propelling reasons of how I've been able to move in leadership positions because I was made aware of where I really was and what industry was looking for, and there were gaps, and it was up to me to fill.
What are your thoughts around opportunities to align education, practice, regulatory, and research?
It's a 2-part answer. The first part is on the academic practice side. So as a member of the American Association of Colleges of Nursing, I'm one of 2 practice members on the board. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, ACN decided that they would put 2 practice members on the board for that practice voice. They had never done that before. I was very fortunate to be picked to be one of the first 2. But at that time, they were trying to establish the rotation of roles so that there would always be someone that had been on the board for the year when someone new was coming on. So I was on it for a year. I totally assumed I would be reelected. I wasn't. I was blown away. So I stayed connected with task forces and projects with AACN, and through that continued to learn a great deal about the organization, what its strategic priorities were in terms of the academic preparation of nurses in the future, both undergraduate and graduate. And so was very happy to get reelected the second time around. So I would roll off the board in March. But what I've learned over the last year and a half is that there is a growing emphasis on ensuring that the relationships between academic practice partnerships are much more solid than they've been before, mostly due to some of the lessons learned through the pandemic, more so that we want more people to want to choose nursing as a career. So that's on the recruitment side of the colleges. We've got to reconcile the relationship between levels of compensation for both faculty as well as practitioners, because there's a great gap there. Because there are many schools that turn away students because they just don't have enough faculty to train them. But if I'm a health system and I'm a partner and I can support salaries and faculty with an eye towards recruiting more students into the future, that's something I, as a chief nurse exec, would like to see come to more fruition. There is definitely a desire between American Association of Colleges of Nursing, American Association of Nurse Leaders to do more formative work on some key elements that are important to transition to practice for students that we want to be more deliberate about as 2 national organizations. And I'm quite encouraged by the work of and the collaboration of Dr. Deb Troutman from AACN and Dr. Robin Begley, AONL. There's very definitive and planned expectations around how that might look in the future. So I would expect within the next year, we're going to see some collaborative efforts between the 2 to help bring that to fruition. In the regulatory side, Nick, your question was, how does that come into it? I think we have some challenges ahead. Nurses spend so much time in health systems answering to the regulatory requirements and so many agencies. I'm not sure what value necessarily today it brings for healthcare. We certainly want regulatory agencies to acknowledge the good work that we do, but there's some tediousness in relation to that. And I would hope that perhaps, especially with electronic records, we can allow data from the EMR to inform regulatory agencies about what we actually do and take away the burden of some of the requirements for documentation and follow up within the record. Maybe AI is our future for that, but we we make nurses do things in the record because that's what an agency needs or wants. I don't know. I think there's some waste there that we need to pay attention to.
You mentioned in a previous podcast episode about the work that you're planning on doing down the road, and as you embark on your journey at UTMB with academic practice partnerships, there is such a great focus right now on the BSN prepared nurses as it relates to Magnet, as well as the development of nursing with advanced degrees. But I'm wondering, what focus should the nurse executive have in partnerships with schools that offer associate degrees, or there are still a few diploma programs out there? I'm aware of a couple organizations affiliated with AMCs where they get all these great students that come in to their organization, but when they graduate, they leave the university and they go elsewhere. And the actual medical center is left for looking at, how do I bring in other people, because I can't retain the people that are coming in as students. So what are your thoughts around associate degrees and diplomas, and what your role would be around that? I know you're a diploma grad, so it's probably a warm place in your heart.
The funny part about being a diploma grad was I was enrolled in a pre-BSN program at a state university, and my GPA wasn't high enough to get into the baccalaureate program. And so they said, you need a different major. And I said, I want to be a nurse. And this is back in the days when it wasn't common for men to pursue a nursing career. It was 2.6% of nurses were male at the time. And I was determined. So I left. I left the university and I didn't know what to do because I didn't know I wasn't paying attention to other ways in which to become a nurse. It was all about going to college, right? It's a 4-year program. So I found out about this diploma program, and it was obviously very formative part of my life. I am very encouraged to work with pipeline programs that allow people to get into the profession in the way in which they can and afford, and then support them to pursue their further education and development if and when they're ready. Now, that bumps up to some issues with like Magnet. So you have to see where the organization is at the time and what goals they've set and what percent of BSN grads they have. But Magnet did relax their requirements, saying wherever it is, whatever the education level of your nursing is, then how would you gradually increase the percent of BSNs? For me, LPNs, MSTs, multi-skilled techs, patient care assistants, associate degree nurses, come on in. Then how do I work with my academic partner to say, how do I help facilitate continued educational growth for those who need it? And in my past experiences, there were several. One was LPN to BSN. Let's figure it out. Not that hard. For some of us, it was weekend work options for people. So they could go to school full time through the week. They could work on the weekends, and they hunkered down and did that for a year or two because it made sense. Then in the end, they get an advanced degree, scholarships, tuition reimbursement, tuition forgiveness, time paid for work done, whatever. Let's be creative, right? But to me, to go up to somebody or even in an orientation class and learn, I started here as a multi-skilled tech or a unit clerk. I became an associate degree nurse. Through tuition and reimbursement, I became an associate degree nurse through a technical college. I've been working as a nurse. Now I'm back to school for my BSN at your school. That warms my heart. And those are the types of people that this lifelong learning just gets embedded in their DNA. They're constantly learning. So I'm very allergic to organizations and say, they only hire BSNs. I don't think we can do that.
It almost seems to me like Magnet's looking at this wrong, though, and just measuring percentage of BSN completion. Shouldn't they instead be measuring development percentage? What percentage of your employees are you investing in to develop them along the way? And in the absence of that, fine, let's look at what the BSN completion percentage is. But the other seems to be far more valuable.
I agree. I think so very much, because you could profile each of those entry-level positions within your organization, find out the count or the percent within the environment, and then show over time that people are gradually pursuing additional education if and when they're ready. And it also goes back, Nick, to what we were talking about in a previous podcast about work-life balance. You got to take where people are. When I was very fortunate. Once I had my bachelor's from a 4-year program, I was able to work at an academic medical center and achieve a master's and a doctorate, full tuition paid. Took me forever, but it was full tuition reimbursement. That was just one of the benefits. I don't know how many people took advantage of that, but, and then my kids could attend the same university for half tuition. Took me some arm twisting to get them there to do that, but it happened. But I think that we've got to acknowledge as health systems as if we want to encourage a pipeline for the future, we should not be short-sighted in our hiring requirements about what we will or will not accept. Because I don't know if that makes sense. And LPNs are another big example of that. And I'd love to talk about that further. For us, and during the pandemic, we found that many nurses were finding it lucrative to take traveler contracts and move and make some great money in other organizations for short-term assignments, 12 weeks, 14 weeks, whatever. Two things we did in my health system. One is that, okay, we're trying to manage this at a time in which healthcare is in a flux, but go do your thing. But when you're ready to come back, come back. That was the first thing. But I will tell you that there were other organizations in our corporation that said, if they leave, non-rehire. I said, we're not doing that. In fact, my thought was, based on some of the experiences that we had, is some people go to other organizations and work, find out it ain't all that great, and actually want to come back, and then they're great ambassadors for the mission, vision, values of which they previously worked. Anyway, don't take your nose off to spite your face. That's one. The second one was, got a phone call from the corporate office that we were allowing LPNs to work in acute care. And that's not what we do. I said, well, I need people who care for patients, and LPNs, they're good folks. And I've worked with them a lot in my past career. But I said, I think we can utilize this resource. And we had a college of nursing. And I thought, if I can hook them into the organization, I might come to become students as well in the future. They said, during the pandemic, yes, you can do that. But after the pandemic, and I told our CEO at the time, I said, this isn't a short-term thing. We're investing in these people, and we're learning how to work as a team together. Again, LPNs, RNs, multi-skilled techs. I said, so after the pandemic, if and when that ever happens, we're investing in this resource. He said, absolutely. Long story short, Nick, is that after it was almost a year, I think, and at the time I left, we had 68 LPNs in the organization. Many, not many, I don't know them to count, but several I know actually went on to achieve their baccalaureate in nursing from our college because of their experience in the organization and the tuition benefit. And our system became a best practice toolkit, the corporation, of how to engage licensed practical nurses within the acute care team in our health system. So my reason for sharing that is that there are many assumptions. And I will tell you, I was at an American Association of Colleges of Nursing, and I had a dean sitting across from me at a conference table and say to me, do you know what some of those chief nurses are doing? They are bringing back LPNs into acute care. And these other deans around the table are nodding, and this is all about baccalaureate education. I got called on to respond to that question. And I said, of course we have. Why wouldn't we? I need people. You can't produce enough for me to have. I'm struggling to keep the ones I have because they can go and make a lot of money other places. We've got LPNs in our system, and they're doing great work, and they're going back to school. So they're a student for you, and they're a practitioner for me. And so these nuances of leadership, I think, are constant reminders that we have to be thoughtful about what our assumptions are in whatever organization we're in, because we got to think things differently.
Yeah. You really have, just on a narrative, really answered a lot of my other questions. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up this episode?
I'm really encouraged by what I see in terms of nursing go forward. You asked me early on in the podcast, Nick, about the Robert Wood Johnson Executive Nurse Fellowship. There are two other programs that I'd like to just mention. And I'm not the sales guy for them, but I think people should be aware of what other avenues might I learn more things about in terms of leadership. Of course, American Nurses Association, AONL, Sigma Theta Tau, there's lots of opportunities for people to take classes and gain experience in terms of nursing leadership. So I'd encourage people to do that. I also mentioned early on, I think in this one is go to where you fear, because if a topic or something is something you're not comfortable with, like finance in nursing, don't run from it. You don't have to be the CFO, but I will never forget when Mary Jo McElroy, Vice President for Patient Care Services at Grant Medical Center, told me, you need to know more about your business than Joe Falconer, the CFO. Make no mistake. I took that to heart, and I'm always grateful for that. The other two are, there is a fellowship program now that I'm thankful to teach in. I actually have 2 sessions coming up. University of South Carolina, it's called the Amy V. Cockcroft Nurse Fellowship Program. It's 1 year. They meet once a quarter. It's focused on leadership development. So wherever you are in your career, it's about how do you learn and discern enough to take the next step. And a project involved doing actually 2 sessions. One is on making the most of your fellowship. So that's at the beginning of the year. And then the other one I'm doing is on strategic management. And it's towards the end. How do you take everything you've just learned and then discern what's the strategy to get to where you want to take either your project or your program or your health system towards? They take 20 students plus a year. And so there's an application fee. The system that itself, that where the person is employed, pays a bit, but a lot of it is just funded through this program. And it was established by a former dean of the University of South Carolina who passed away and left money for leadership development for students in the state or fellows in the state, but it's expanded. So there are other students, non-South Carolinians, that are actually in the program. And then finally, the Robert Wood Johnson Executive Nurse Fellows Program has transitioned from that program to now one called Nurse Trust. NURSE TRUST, one word. And they too have an annual fellowship program. I'm a member. I'm not actively involved in the fellowship program right now because of my transitions, but excellent people who have been through that RWJF program now leading an opportunity. And it's about a year-long fellowship. And it's also been supported by the Center for Creative Leadership. And that's an extraordinary group of knowledge leaders beyond healthcare in industries overall. So I'd really encourage folks to take a look at both those programs and see if either of them makes sense to them. And also, Nick, for the listeners, if anybody needs some assistance for the questions, if I can help you, email me, call me. We're here to grow together.
The topic of our episode was aligning practice, education, and regulatory nurse leaders, but we really veered more into a workforce development strategy and how do we support and mentor and grow together as a specialty, as a profession, but also bringing up nursing and those that are trying to get into the profession and specialty, because there's not enough out there teaching it. Jerry Mansfield, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today.
You're welcome, Nick. You have a great day.
You too.
You've been listening to the BRG Nurse Executive Podcast, which focuses on improving patient care by advancing nursing leadership. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and podcast guest and do not necessarily reflect the opinions, position, or policy of the guest employer, Berkeley Research Group, or their other respective employees and affiliates.